Hi, everyone. It looks like we have a pretty good group of people on. It looks like it's 12:05, so I think we're going to go ahead and kick off our webinar about Colorado's near-term contribution program on the Colorado River. So to kick us off, my name is Amy Ostick. I am the chief of the Interstate Federal and Water Information Section, and I'm joined at the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and I'm joined by Jason Ullman, the state engineer. So we are here to talk today about some Colorado River issues and primarily Colorado's near-term contribution program. Before we get started, just a little bit about who we are and what we're doing. So, like I said, my name is Amy, and I work for CWCB, the state's water policy agency, and I work particularly in the section that works in interstate and federal issues. I have been working closely with Commissioner Becky Mitchell on Colorado River negotiations and supporting her in those efforts. So I'm going to start with providing just a really brief update on where we are on the Colorado River, and then I'm going to jump into talking about Colorado's near-term contribution program. I do want to also note, and just a word of thanks for those who submitted questions and comments ahead of this webinar. We've heard from a lot of folks who are really interested in this topic and really appreciate that. We're going to do our best to answer some of the questions that we've heard, whether those have been emailed to us or are floating around, but also want to give you some assurance that if your questions don't get answered today, we're going to have another follow-up webinar, and we're going to be doing a lot of outreach over the next couple of months, so we'll try to get to it when we can. But just to start, I want to begin with some context on what's going on in the Colorado River right now and what the state of Colorado is up to. So, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, there has been an ongoing process to determine the future operations of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The '07 guidelines expired at the end of last year, but are operational through October 1st of this year. So we've been engaged in a 7-state negotiation to try to figure out what the post-2026 operations of Powell and Mead will look like. But this is also a NEPA process under the National Environmental Policy Act. So ultimately, the Bureau of Reclamation, the federal government, is running the show here, and we'll have to select a preferred alternative. And within that process, the Bureau of Reclamation recently, just last week, put out a final environmental impact statement. I'm really not going to talk about that today, but just want to highlight, if you want to go read it, it is on the Bureau of Reclamation's website. And what you're going to see there is concepts for, like I said, future operations of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. There is a preferred alternative identified in that final EIS that includes a 10-year framework for operations of Powell and Mead within certain parameters, and that would be renegotiated every 2 years. So not going to talk about the details of that today. We look forward to digging in a little bit more in the final EIS and really analyzing what's there. But what I want to focus on today is the voluntary contribution program, the near-term contribution program that Colorado is working to set up. And to put that in some context, there are separate parallel processes ongoing, kind of parallel to the post-2026 NEPA process. And essentially what this means is that the upper division states are working on agreements with the Bureau of Reclamation on a parallel track to that NEPA process to cover a couple of different parallel activities. One of those is agreements relating to the operation of the upstream initial units. That's Blue Mesa Reservoir in Colorado, Flaming Gorge Reservoir in Utah and Wyoming, and Navajo Reservoir in New Mexico. So we're working on an agreement relating to that. But another parallel activity that the upper division states have committed to is establishing a voluntary contribution program. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So, what is a contribution program? Why are we talking about this right now? Well, like I said, throughout the course of the negotiations, Colorado, together with the upper division states of New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, have committed to establishing a contribution program where the upper division states are making contributions to the Colorado River and providing water that, but for these actions, would not be there. So, what has recently occurred is that the Bureau of Reclamation has announced availability of $100 million in federal funding for a near-term Upper Basin contribution program. We anticipate this would support a 2-year contribution program across the Upper Basin, so that's really what we're focused on. And in order to bring these funds into the state of Colorado, for Colorado to participate, we need to act now to begin establishing a program. This also makes good on a commitment we have consistently made throughout the negotiations and shows that Colorado is committed to being part of the solution and working with our fellow Upper Basin states to be part of the solution on the Colorado River and do it in a way that provides a benefit to the Upper Division states. So, where do we start? Well, the good news is that we don't have to start from scratch because here in Colorado, we've been talking about various concepts around water conservation for about 15 years now, and probably even longer than that, if we're being honest. It's been an ongoing discussion with a whole lot of water user stakeholder input, a lot of thought, and also some practical implementation along the way. So I want to talk a little bit about where we have been and what we've worked on as a state relating to these types of issues. It started years and years ago with the Water Bank Work Group. And again, there were, I'm sure, discussions happening even before that. But the Water Bank Work Group was really focused on concepts around water conservation to provide for a future water bank for the state of Colorado. A little bit different than what we're talking about today. And I'll talk about that and how what we're doing today differs from a lot of these efforts a little bit later. But that really kicked off some of the discussions where a lot of the key issues and questions around operating a program, conservation program, were first identified and documented. Then we went into the System Conservation Pilot Program. This is a program that was implemented a couple of different times, once in 2015, that should say 2018, not 2015 through 2015, and again in 2023 through 2024. So we've done this a few different times and we've learned a whole lot along the way. But just to be clear about what System Conservation Pilot Program was, it was voluntary temporary compensated water conservation across the Upper Basin. And the water that was conserved became system water and helped mitigate the impacts of drought in the Upper Basin. So, like I said, we learned a lot throughout the System Conservation Pilot Program. We didn't do it in the same way in 2024 that we did in 2015. Some of the things we learned, particularly in recent years, is we needed to, for example, start the process way earlier. Water users needed some additional time than they got in previous iterations to make decisions about their operations and to just get ready for what was to come. So we implemented some of that input not only in the last iterations of System Conservation Pilot Program, that's part of the reason that we're starting this when we are today, that we have heard from folks across the state that they really need as much lead time as they can to think about what participating in a program like this would mean for their operations. So the System Conservation Pilot Program gave us some operational experience in a conservation program. It gave us experience coordinating with the other Upper Division states as well in programs like this. 2015 through 2018, we got a lot of that experience, and all of that also helped inform what came next, which was the Demand Management Feasibility Investigation. Now, I want to be clear that demand management is a concept that is defined by the 2019 Demand Management Storage Agreement. That was part of the 2019 Drought Contingency Plan on the Colorado River. I'm not going to get into all the details, but that's all to say it really is a term of art. There are specific requirements that the Upper Division states would have had to reach, certain agreements we would have had to reach to establish a program, and those were all required in the Demand Management Storage Agreement. If a demand management program would have been established, it would have provided for a 500,000 acre foot pool in Lake Powell, where the Upper Division states could have stored that conserved water and used it in the future to ensure ongoing compliance with the Colorado River Compact. So it had a specific purpose, it had specific requirements. And to be clear, the Demand Management Storage Agreement did not establish a demand management program. What it really did was establish an investigation into whether demand management was feasible and really made sense across the Upper Basin. Every state in the Upper Basin was doing their own feasibility investigation. We all looked at this through our unique policy, legal, administrative frameworks and lenses. And so our investigations all looked a little bit different, but we also came together as Upper Basin states and talked about a lot of the challenges and opportunities in working together as Upper Division states relating to a potential demand management program. So CWCB in particular did a lot of work looking at the feasibility of demand management. Started in 2019, and actually it started in 2018 when our board was proactive in developing a policy statement and some guidance for how we were going to look at these issues before the DCP was actually even inked. So we were way ahead and did a lot of work throughout multiple years looking at the concept of temporary, voluntary, compensated reductions in consumptive use and participating in an upper basin program like this. It started with the 2019 work plan when we looked at broad, big picture questions. We established a number of different work groups with hundreds of folks across the state participating, engaging, providing input, providing their thoughts throughout that process. So we got tons of really good input throughout that, and all of that culminated in this report that we did in July 2020. If you want to read it, it's I don't know, a couple hundred pages long, but has a whole lot of good information that came out of that first stage of the investigation and really identified some of the key issues and considerations that those work group members came up with. So I would encourage anyone interested to look at the materials on our website relating to demand management, the feasibility investigation. Ultimately, our board developed this decision-making roadmap where they were really considering, is demand management achievable? Is it, possible? Some of these nuts and bolts of the program, is it worthwhile? And finally, is it advisable? And at the time that our board was considering that, there was a lot going on in the Colorado River Basin. And really, it was a question of, is this the right tool at the right time? So our board and the Upper Basin states never made a finding of feasibility under the demand management storage agreement. That also is expiring by its terms. So while there was not a demand management program established, what we do have out of the feasibility investigation is a really incredible body of information and knowledge and stakeholder outreach and input that came from all the work that we did throughout that. So we continued and continued to get input, continued to think about these issues, but also continue to think about, what was lacking, for example, in the System Conservation Pilot Program. And one thing that we heard consistently about SCPP from water users in Colorado was that, hey, if we're going to do this, if we're going to conserve and contribute water, we would really like a mechanism to get credit for that water, as opposed to it simply flowing downstream. So there was discussion among the upper division states, and we really wanted to also not only think about how we could get credit for this water in the future, but also think about how we could work together as upper division states to account for and verify water that could be contributed. So this led to the Provisional Accounting Memorandum of Understanding. And this was an MOU, it is an MOU between the Upper Division states and the Bureau of Reclamation that essentially provides a mechanism for the Upper Division states to contribute water, to participate in conservation contribution activities, and for the Upper Division states to work together to account for that water and verify that contributed water and account for it. Like I said, with the Bureau of Reclamation fully read in on that. So we learned a lot working with the Upper Division states. We also learned a lot about how we can contribute water within the state of Colorado within our existing law, within our existing authorities, and to coordinate with the other upper division states on accounting for that water. To be clear, what the Provisional Accounting MOU does not provide is the mechanism for credit for that water. The anticipation was that that would come in a future date in the post-2026 world at some point. But it certainly provided for the operational experience of participating in a contribution type program, getting credit for that water or accounting for that water in a way that we could get future credit for it. So, like I said, we have talked to a lot of people about these concepts. There's been so much discussion across the state for the last 15, 20 plus years about these different concepts. We've gotten input from every corner of the state. Here are just a few of the entities that have engaged with us and worked closely with us on thinking about all of this. We've also, of course, worked very closely with the other upper division states, the Upper Colorado River Commission, and coordinating all this and running it up through the upper division states and making sure that we are all working together on something like this. So What we have observed, I guess, throughout the last 15 years of looking at these issues is that there are a lot of things that came up back with Water Bank Work Group, themes that continued through today. Um, and there are a lot of things that, I was just struck by, man, it seems like we keep talking about the same types of things, the same types of concerns, the same types of things we would want to prioritize. We use slightly different language sometimes, but all of these are things that we've been talking about for the last 15 plus years. So the key themes that came up from all of this work, number one, avoid injury to water rights holders. That came up consistently. How do we do this in a way that will comply with Colorado state law and avoid injury? The second bullet here, this has been talked about in so many different ways. We've called it proportionality. We've talked about, ensuring essentially that there is an opportunity for, not just an opportunity for, but that it is incentivized to have participation from all sectors and regions in the state that use Colorado River water. Another thing, like I said, on the more kind of procedural side of things is we've heard from water users that we really need to start the process as early as we possibly can to put people on notice that it's happening and to give them an opportunity to proactively make decisions about their operations. Another thing we heard consistently is this concept of secondary economic impact. So, how do we address, how do we first identify, frankly, and then address by avoiding or mitigating secondary economic impacts that might occur in communities where there's a lot of participation in a program like this? Um, Next, we heard loud and clear that there's a real desire to incentivize multi-benefit projects. And I typically think about this in terms of environmental considerations. We had a specific environmental considerations work group in the demand management investigation, for example. So if we're going to be conserving and contributing water, is there a way to do it in a way that maximizes or incentivizes some of the other benefits, like environmental benefits that we could realize? And finally, again, throughout all this, and particularly system conservation pilot program, we have heard from folks that, hey, if we're going to do this, we should get credit for it in some way. It should be for the benefit of the state of Colorado and the upper division states. So that's something else that we have really taken to heart and considered throughout this as well. So that brings us to today. I want to revisit what we're doing, why we're doing it, this near-term contribution program, and provide a little bit more definition to why we're calling it a contribution program. Again, it seems like we've been talking about a lot of different concepts throughout the years. The reason that we're talking about it as a contribution program, for one, it's intended to be broader in scope than just conservation. A lot of people think about system conservation pilot program or conserve consumptive use programs as simply fallowing fields, but we really want this to include all water use sectors and water use sectors other than just agricultural uses. So we want to consider this very broadly, more broadly than perhaps conservation and conserved consumptive use has been contemplated in the past. The baseline metric for eligibility among the upper division states participating in a contribution program is that water would be voluntarily contributed that would not be available but for that approved project. So that's kind of the metric that we are looking at on a broad scale together with the upper division states who will also be implementing this alongside us. So we're currently working, like I said, in coordination with the other upper division states, and we're anticipating that the application window is going to open this fall. We know, based on previous experience, that $100 million is likely to support a 2-year program, but I also want to be clear that right now what we're really focused on is year one. We fully anticipate this is going to be an iterative process. Our current effort is built on and informed by a really strong foundation of 15 plus years of analysis and input and implementation in some cases, but we're also going to learn as we go and we'll adjust course as we need to. There's going to be ongoing analysis of open questions, of various issues and consideration of a lot of things throughout this first year, and that might help inform the following year of implementation. So how is this going to roll out? Who's doing what? What is the process going to be? Well, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, as a state water policy agency with representation from all basins within the state, is going to develop criteria, consider input on applications, and ultimately approve projects and provide statutory protection by approving it, if they so choose, as a state-approved conservation program, which provides protection for historical consumptive use. But we're going to be working very closely with the Division of Water Resources and Jason and his staff. And I want to turn it over to Jason for a minute just to talk about what that process will look like on his side, some of those considerations.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and thanks for the very thorough description of the past history and how what got us to this point here. As far as Division of Water Resources, I guess I should say for those people online, I'm Jason Holman, State Engineer and Director of the Division of Water Resources. So our agency is the agency that administers the prior appropriation system within the state of Colorado and directs water use under that system. And our role, I guess, one of the roles in this process will be similar to a role we served in the CPP uh, uh, program, was reviewing these projects for injury, fatal flaws that may cause injury to other water rights by participating water rights, may cause difficulty in delivery. So infrastructure, because our staff, our water commissioners that are out in the communities that they administer water in. They are the ones that know what's going on the ground. They have a good idea of how all of these water rights interact with each other and are administered together. One of the additional things that we will be reviewing in the case of these projects is whether these projects are administrable and whether, like in SCPP, as Amy's made it very clear, there was no credit. That water went back to the system and then was available essentially for the next available appropriator downstream. Um, and in this case, the program would provide credit for the upper division states in Colorado to meet one of those criteria. And in order to do that, we would be reviewing these projects for administrability within what the existing authorities the state engineer has to move water around the state to accomplish the goals of the program. And some of those existing authorities that might be used would, include ISF statutes that would help accomplish multi-purpose benefits, right? You get water that can be moved around that also improves the environment in the reaches that it is flowing through. And then maybe another example would be appropriately timed releases from storage that can be released from storage of water that resulted from the non-use of a water right. Um, so those are just a couple of them. Obviously, that's not exhaustive, but those are the roles that I see for the division engineers and Division of Water Resources in this program is evaluating for both avoiding injury and for the ability to administer them. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, each project will be subject to a determination by us and will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Right now we are investigating what existing authorities and what that might entail, but I think that covers what I think our role would be. So I'll turn it back over to Amy. Um,
Thank you, Jason. So as I said, the Colorado Water Conservation Board is going to work in very close coordination with Jason and his team relating to all the factors that Jason just mentioned. Um, so next steps and kind of what we're looking at now and what we would really love your input on. So, like I said, the Colorado Water Conservation Board will be considering and adopting criteria for consideration of projects, and this is going to be up for discussion at the September CWCB meeting. So, what we're considering right now is what are the potential criteria that could be used to evaluate projects? We looked back on all of the input that we received, all the work that we've done that I just detailed, and developed a list of criteria. It is meant to be flexible to allow for participation, but also to address many of the considerations that we heard throughout all of these processes. So this is a list of proposed criteria. Again, this is what we would love people's input on. I'll walk through these quickly. Number one, result in credit and result in a benefit derived to the upper division states, which includes Colorado. Next, operating within existing authorities and utilizing federal funding. These are kind of programmatic level criteria, but we've heard loud and clear that people really believe that to establish a program like this at this particular time, that we should use federal funding. And fortunately, we have $100 million that the Bureau of Reclamation is making available for us to do that right now. And again, I'll just emphasize that these funds need to be obligated in the near future. If we want to take advantage of the $100 million that is available to us from the Bureau of Reclamation to the upper division states, we really need to get started right now and have our application window opening in the fall. So it'll utilize that federal funding. Another thing that we've heard loud and clear and is a real priority for the state of Colorado and for Commissioner Mitchell is providing opportunities for tribal participation and understanding how the tribes can participate in a program like this. Protecting water rights, that's why Jason and his team are going to be so involved, ensuring compliance with state law, avoiding injury, everything that comes with that. A minimum acreage. So I believe in System Conservation Pilot Program, we had a minimum acreage of, I think, 40 acres. We're going to be looking at that and considering, what is the appropriate minimum for agricultural projects to participate. Another thing is helping to support drought resilience. So we've heard a lot throughout System Conservation Pilot Program, for example, there have been these projects that have really helped a water user improve drought resilience in various ways, maybe at a local level. But are there projects that we could support that will help build and support drought resilience locally? Administrative ease, again, this goes to some of the things that Jason was saying, ensuring that this is something that is actually administrable and doable for the Division of Water Resources. We also heard it's important to make sure that projects are complying with ditch company bylaws or other requirements that might be in place, and that a participant is assuring and certifying that that is the case. Um, Foreseeable community impacts. So this kind of gets to that reasonably foreseeable secondary economic impacts that might occur as a result of participation or multiple people participating in a particular community. That's something that we want to consider and avoid if we can. And this next one gets to, again, this proportionality issue of encouraging contributions from across the state and sectors. And this is where I'll say, we're so fortunate the board is fortunate to have representation from all corners of the state. This has been a priority for our board when they've been talking about these issues, and I think that they're well positioned and well suited to consider this issue. Incentivize multi-benefit projects. Again, a lot of times we think about that in terms of, are there mechanisms to encourage projects with environmental benefits? But just more broadly, what are the multiple benefits that we might see as a result of certain projects? So these are the draft criteria that we have now. I talked to the board about this in July, but we'll go back in September and finalize those criteria so that we can shortly thereafter start taking applications for a contribution program in year one. So this is where we really want to hear from you. If you have thoughts on these criteria, what do you think really matters? What's more important? What are we missing? We would love for you to email this email address here, dnr_contribution program@state.co.us. Please let us know your thoughts. And also, if you have any other questions that were not addressed in this webinar, please feel free to email them there. And we will address them at the next webinar if we can. But we're going to be out and about in a lot of different places in the next couple months, so you can also hit us somewhere else. We're doing a workshop at Water Congress the afternoon of Wednesday, August 19th from 2 to 4. So if you drop some questions at that email address, maybe we'll be able to talk about those there. Or if you have input you'd like us to consider. We also will have another webinar after this one to talk more about this and to, again, address some of the input that we're receiving, the questions that we're hearing. And finally, we're going to be talking to the board about this so that they can consider these criteria and the next steps in establishing Colorado's near-term contribution program at our September board meeting. So please check out the contribution program webpage at the QR code there, and we'll do our best to make sure that everyone is updated on where we will be across the state discussing the state's near-term contribution program. Um, as we are doing this, we at the state level are also going to be in ongoing coordination with the other upper division states, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. They are all also engaged in this. We're in this together. They're working through their own processes to get ready to roll this out, but we're also going to be coordinated to make sure that this program is working for and benefiting the upper division states. But again, we really see this as doing our part to be part of the solution on the Colorado River. That I believe is all that we have for you today. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who is here and who joined us today to talk about this. We really appreciate all the questions that you guys sent in. We tried to address them as best that we could. But if there is anything else that has not been addressed, please feel free to reach out to us. Checking the chat, it does seem like there are some questions that have come up about the proportionality issue. Hopefully, I've addressed some of those questions in the webinar today. We really do take that issue seriously. And as I said, the concept of a contribution program is really meant to capture all water use type sectors. If you're using Colorado River water within the state of Colorado, we're interested in your proposal for a project. So we have heard this input, we take it seriously, our board takes it seriously, and we will consider mechanisms to make sure that we are getting participation from across the state. So I think that that's all that we have for you today. Jason, let me know if you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to say, and otherwise we can go ahead and close it down and see everyone next time.
I don't
Nope.
think I have anything to add.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today, and we will see you soon, I'm sure. Thanks. Bye.